Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. On the show today, all the fallout from the final round of the 2022 MotoGP World Championship, the Tuesday test day, bit of Moto2, Moto3, and our off-season plans too. The recording date is Friday, the 11th of November. My name is Harry Benjamin. Joining me, as ever, is Crash's MotoGP editor, Pete McLaren, and former Grand Prix rider and British champion, Keith Huewen. And I suppose apologies to start off with. We know we're a bit late. We know that. Scheduling, testing. I'm doing electric scooters. It's Keith's worst nightmare. Pete was in Valencia, but he's got all the latest testing news. We're here now, and that's what counts. And let's chat, shall we? The elephant in the room, I suppose. Pecco, world champion.
Yeah, I don't think that's an elephant in the room. It's just it went the way it should have gone, but not quite the way we thought it might. At the end of the day, I think we're late on a Friday because we did ours from the pub on Sunday. The good old Stirrup Cup in Kettering was where we all spent our time. Full house of revellers, if you like. It had a sort of football atmosphere to it as well. Like half a dozen monitors, and everybody stopped that wasn't a MotoGP fan was watching the MotoGP because, I mean, if we talk about the MotoGP race and a major on the MotoGP race, what an opening couple of laps. They were just throwing it at each other. You know, brilliant from everybody's point of view. I mean, I think everybody did everything they could do at the end of the day. And if you'd written a script, you would have had Suzuki winning the final round in their final ever race, which they did. I've got to say, it was quite sad when I saw some of the photographs coming from the paddock the day after on the Monday, that gap that was in the back of the garages where the Suzuki trucks used to be, because everyone else was obviously staying on for the Tuesday test, including Pete, but Suzuki had pulled out. That was the last time we were ever going to see them for the foreseeable future. And I've got to say that having made the decision to come out of the sport, I doubt we will see them back for many, many moons. But the actual MotoGP race was outstanding, and spending it in a pub, if you can find a pub that shows MotoGP, that is the way to watch the final round.
It looked like you had the best seat in the house as well. You were there from about 8 a.m. in the morning,
I
weren't
was.
you?
No, I turned up early. I turned up early because I thought I'll take my notepad with me just to make, because I thought we're doing this on a Friday. I'm going to be drinking.
You won't remember what happened.
Exactly. I'm going to be drinking. I'm of a certain age. I need to write all this down. But of course, what happens when you're out there with your mates? You should see my paperwork. It has got insults written over it. It has got edited points on it. I sat on a table with Bertie Simmons, a journo and a well-known joker, who turned up with his hair all over the place. Looked like he'd just been dragged through a hedge backwards. He looked like he was already been down the pub for a week, let alone when we got there. But I mean, from when I got there at 8:30, there was nothing going on, obviously, and I tweeted a few pictures out of the pub. But then it just kicked off. Moto3, I mean, it was John McPhee's final round. He goes off, leaves the MotoGP paddock in a very, very, I mean, I'm sorry for jumping forward, Harry. I know you'll go there, but when he was interviewed down on the grid, he was in tears. You know, the thing is with television, racing, atmosphere, personalities, everything gets crushed down almost to a two-dimensional thing. But every now and again, it breaks through, doesn't it? It hits you in the face. And John McPhee, you know, long in the tooth perhaps now for Moto3, but a man that's dedicated his entire life to being in that paddock from a boy, from the earliest age you can think of. And it kind of hit me in the heart as well, because I remember what it was like in my situation when you leave the paddock. It hurts. It is a real stinger. But you don't kind of get that at home. Everybody goes, oh, yeah, John McPhee's moving on to, you know, World Supersport or wherever he's going. But it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And I thought that the weekend at Valencia, despite the fact Valencia is a sort of passion killer for me of a racetrack, there was still a huge amount of passion and a huge amount of nuances here and there that you kind of went, wow. You know, and John McPhee was one of them for me. I mean, anybody that didn't get stung in the heart with that one hasn't got a heart.
Well, as you say, we'll come on more on Moto3. But it was a great weekend to watch on the TV for us. But Pete, you were actually there, weren't you? I think it was your picture that went viral on Twitter of that gap where Suzuki once were after they'd all packed up and gone. I mean, what was the atmosphere like? Because, I mean, Alex Rins winning, the perfect sort of swan song for Suzuki. And I think everybody in the paddock, including most of the Suzuki team members actually there, are just asking themselves, why the hell are we leaving?
Exactly, Harry, isn't it? It's what we were saying after Phillip Island doubled, isn't it? Of just what a waste, Alex Rins winning there, and now he's done it again. And as Keith says, not only John McPhee in tears, it sounds like Alex Rins on the grid was also in tears, saying goodbye to everybody and everything else. So to put all that into focus and blast from fifth to first at the first corner and ride the perfect race, I mean, fantastic from Rins, just mentally as much as anything else, to keep it together like that.
Joan Mir, he said that he still don't understand it. He still doesn't get to the bottom of it at all. I mean, I was slightly annoyed at the television actually. I know there was so much going on. You almost needed two split screens, didn't you, with what was going on with the actual racing between Quartararo and some bloke called Pecco Bagnaia. But we kind of missed out on Suzuki being out in front quite a lot, which was a bit of a shame. They woke up a bit later on in the race and gave him the kind of just coverage.
Just about. I think there's a lot of joking, being like, if Suzuki wanted any sort of swan song video footage, they weren't going to get it because it wasn't on the screen. Because naturally, Pete, everybody was following the Pecco Bagnaia and also Fabio Quartararo at one point, looking like he was doing everything he could to try and keep hold of his championship to become, a two-time champion. Obviously, he had to win outright, but Pecco had to be sort of near the bottom end of the points for him to even stand a chance. But Pecco was sort of falling down the field, sort of, one rider per lap, really, and getting involved in quite a few scrapes. Contact early doors with Fabio as well.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, it shouldn't have been as tense as it actually turned out to be, should it? It was a bit of a formality, really. I mean, Pecco just having to finish, even if Quartararo won, in the top 14, he could do that with his eyes closed and riding backwards, but put in all that pressure and the significance of the weekend, not just for Pecco, the whole of Ducati. I think it was Zarco after the race sort of admitted, it's been a tense weekend at Ducati. I mean, Zarco obviously in the Pramac team, even he was feeling it. They've waited so long for this moment, and there is that pressure that builds up. You can tell yourself it's not there, and you can say it's just another race, but it really isn't. I mean, it was a massive weekend for Pecco, for the team, for everybody. A lot of fans as well. Keith mentioned the atmosphere. I mean, we were surprised. Even Saturday was nearly full. You're looking out, as Keith says, it's a big concrete jungle. So from the media room, you can see all around the track, and it was just almost full on Saturday. Sunday, I think, was sold out 90,000 plus. So it does just show probably what these kind of title deciders do for the fans and how they engage people. You're talking about people going down the pub, all of it. It adds something, doesn't it? Even when the maths is against any kind of real upset, it's still got that something extra, isn't it? Having a title decided at the final round.
And the fact that you got all the manufacturers that were in it. I mean, Brad Binder, a second place in the final round. I mean, like, you've got to say, KTM, Suzuki winning, KTM second place. I mean, just have a bit of that. I can't wait till Miller. I mean, he ought to have his own show. I mean, he is an absolute rock star, isn't he? Just the fun and game. I should think probably 70% of the clips that came out of Valencia over the weekend had Miller in them. If it wasn't riding a forklift round in a circle with everything that happened, when they tied him up and dumped him down at the KTM camp, and the crew chief as well, just stuck handcuffs on him, and you just wonder. I mean, I can imagine the Italian sense of humour, really enjoying Jack Miller, but I kind of questioned a little bit whether the Austrian sense of humour is slightly more straight, I think, than they're perhaps depicted as. We'll see how Miller gets on there from that, whether it's going to be a shock to the system for them when Jack starts playing up and having a bit of a giggle. But what a team that's going to be. Brad Binder and Jack Miller in KTM next year. I can't wait for that.
Well, Miller will make a great TV pundit one day, won't he, when eventually he stops.
You'll have to have a bleeper.
Until then, yeah. Yes. It'd be brilliant. That would be TV gold. But it was actually, as Pete says, more tense than we actually thought it would be. But I mean, we've spoken about it before. Just coming back to Bagnaia, looking at the big stats, overcoming a 91-point deficit to Fabio Quartararo. The first rider with 5 DNFs in a season to become a champion, bringing the Ducati, bringing a world championship back to Ducati since Casey Stoner. I found it interesting though, Keith, that Bagnaia has said quite openly that it was mistakes during the early stages of this season that made him understand that actually he had a bit of an issue. He was fast, but he admitted he had no consistency. I would suppose you agree with that?
I do. And he's a clever fella. I think he's a young fella. He's a clever fella. He's worked his way through it. Quartararo, by contrast, had more mistakes, and the Yamaha, I'm glad we're going to get onto the test in a minute with Pete, because there's so much to talk about regarding the test and a lot of unhappy people moving forward. I think Ducati are in a perfect position at the minute. Bastianini was a bit under the radar as well at the weekend. I mean, I would have expected him to have performed a little better than perhaps he did at Valencia, but it's a funny place, Valencia. They got lucky this year with the weather. We had consistent weather all the way through, and apart from the first thing in the morning where it was a bit chilly, it was clear, it was clean, the track cleaned up during the course of the weekend. They got quite lucky with that, perhaps. But I can see now that we always used to talk about aliens, didn't we? I mean, there were certain aliens out of the top guys. Marquez was one of them. Lorenzo, Casey Stoner going back a bit further. You can go back further than that if you like. But these guys that absolutely stood out, that did things with their motorbike that no one else seemed to have been able to do. With the latest aero and with the ride height adjustments and all the bits and seamless gearboxes, if you go back a little bit for, a lot of that has been dialed out now. It's all, everybody is riding within a second. If you look at the test, everyone, all the top guys down to some 17th, 18th place are within a second. Everywhere you go, you've got a full-on field that are so close, and I can see it getting closer and closer and closer with the way the regulations are. And no one is able to sort of steal a march at the moment with this engineering bloody situation where it all has to be done by the first round of the year. I'm sorry to bang on about it again. We're going to end up with Yamaha perhaps not in the best place, with Honda not in a great place. And so it's going to be, somebody's going to be winning in the early rounds, and someone's going to be, and it's going to be a much tighter championship, I can see, moving forward, as it has been this year. It's almost like everybody's been trying to give it to the other person. Quartararo couldn't quite put it together in the second half. Bagnaia absolutely nailed it. Now, he's going to come out the box next year with a motorbike that works, with a new teammate that's going to be pushing him really hard. I think Bastianini is going to be a difficult teammate to have. The atmosphere is going to be different in the Ducati factory camp now that Jack's moved over to KTM. We'll see how it all pans out, but I can see another very, very close year. And Aprilia. I mean, just looking again at the test, I can't wait to get to the test part of it, because it's been a bit of a shock to the system for some new rider right up there. First test got on the Aprilia, which for me is an indicator of just how good the Aprilia is. That it's a motorbike that you can ride, jump on it, perform well in Valencia, not an easy racetrack, in a one-off test. We can't wait to see what Aprilia does next year. But back to what you said, Aleix Espargaro basically imploded for him. You talked about Pecco Bagnaia, making moves in the second half of the season, but Aprilia just couldn't quite put it together, could they? They had technical issues, Aleix, little mistakes here and there, and it cost them third place in the championship in the end.
And we know, Pete, that Aleix is an emotional guy.
He lets you know what he's thinking, doesn't he? Yeah, and good on him for that. I have to say, I think it's. I know that people say, he maybe shouldn't be so hard on the team or say this or that, but if that's what he's thinking, then I think why not? I mean, and that, as you say, he didn't just lose third in the championship. Aprilia lost second in the constructors and second in the teams championship. Total nightmare of a race. With both Aleix and Vinales having those technical problems. I think Aleix was something to do with the fuel supply. Maverick was something on the front of the bike. We never really got a clear explanation. But so both, I mean, even if Maverick was the only one that finished, that probably would have been enough to get them the few points they needed to keep second in the World Championship, the constructors, away from Yamaha. Instead, it was all across the board, nightmare day for them. Really hard for them. I mean, it's a tough one. Who deserves third in the championship more? Bastianini with all those wins, or Aleix? You can make a case for either, couldn't you? All four of the guys really in the championship are worthy in one way or another, aren't they? It's been that sort of season. Normally it's pretty clear that the guy who wins the World Championship, we've got so used to it, is usually the standout guy of the season. This year, we've had surprises all over the place. Then you can make an argument for any of the top four of really being the star of the year.
You totally can. I mean, what an end actually to a season, which started, I think we could all say, a bit underwhelming compared to 2021, which was full of excitement and each round. But I think 2022 delivered in the end for sure. Let's move on to testing then, because I know Keith is desperate. And actually before that, I think I said Bagnaia is the first Ducati world champion since Casey Stoner in 2015. I meant it 15 years ago. So before you'll come at me in the comments. Right, Pete, you were there at testing. That's why we delayed this whole thing, and then I went to France. But you were in Valencia for the testing. Obviously, you've already alluded to it. New riders at Aprilia, KTM, Honda, all change. New liveries, some unliveried, new bits and bobs. Give us the rundown. What things did you pick out most?
So I guess just to set the scene, as you say, there was about 9 riders, weren't there, that were changing bikes, if you count Bastianini and things like that, Augusto Fernandez coming in. The guys that were changing teams, they are, of course, still under contract to their previous teams, if you like, until the end of December. So they weren't allowed to speak to us, unfortunately. That's just always the way it is. You might have seen some comments that they gave to MotoGP.com, but that was all they were allowed to do. The big thing is they're never allowed to compare bikes. I don't know why, but manufacturers are always worried that they're going to, well, I suppose reasonably get on a new bike and say, oh, it's so much better than that thing I was riding this year. So they're not allowed to do that. But even in the case of guys like the ex-Suzuki riders, they weren't allowed to speak. And you think, well, what's going on there? They're not even going to, Suzuki's not even going to be in MotoGP next year. But so Mir and Rins didn't come to see us, the media, for the normal debriefs. But the other guys staying with their teams did. So, and the big news from those was obviously, and Keith alluded to this, guys like Marc Marquez really not being happy with what Honda brought, and Fabio also being extremely surprised to find this new engine that had been doing so well up to this point, and that Cal had tested the latest version of only a week earlier at Jerez. Suddenly it's no faster on the straights, and they didn't understand why. And it was Morbidelli found the same thing as well. No explanation really, other than that something strange had happened. Now, is it setting up the engine, the electronics, something? Who knows? But I mean, it's a big blow for them. I mean, Quartararo admitted, I'm disappointed. You can't not be when the things have been looking so positive, and now suddenly that's it. That's the one day of testing now until Sepang in February. So, yeah, big surprise for him that the one thing that the engine looked like it had, and I spoke to Cal earlier in the weekend, and he was, he's adamant it's got more power. So the bit that Cal's not sure about is the grip side. Because the trouble is that with all these tests, they occur after the race, or the tests so far, let's say, with Quartararo and Morbidelli, the race riders have been after race weekend, so loads of tyre grip, which is where the Yamaha is actually quite strong anyway. If the track's got a lot of grip, it goes okay. Where they struggle is when it's low grip, and obviously Cal's, when he's testing, he quite often has low grip, so he's actually in a better position to evaluate the engine. But the one thing Cal was sure about is it's got more power. You can kind of tick that box. I interviewed Lynn Jarvis earlier in the weekend, and he also was saying this, they were sure about the power side. So, and then suddenly, where's it gone? So, big question mark there for Yamaha to sort of sort out what's happened there. With Marquez, he had, it sounded like sort of small changes, but as he made clear, it wasn't enough. Now, you have to say, Marc, that he's been around long enough, and he knows how to keep pressure on a factory. That's the other side. If you come out and go, oh, this bike is fantastic, everyone takes their foot off the gas, let's say, and so he knows that the best. You don't do that in testing if you're a rider. You don't say this bike is fine, everybody pack up and let's go to the first race now. You've got to keep the pressure on the factory to squeeze as much out of them as you can. Now, I'm not saying that the bike was fantastic and that's what Marc was doing, but I think there's always an element of that he, after these 3 years of the Honda really struggling, he doesn't want any risk of them thinking that the problems are solved if they're not. But clearly, I mean, he spelt it out. He said, look, this bike will not, as it is now, this prototype, if you like, will not win the championship next year. We need more than this. There's no question about it. So wasn't the only one disappointed. Aprilia, we didn't get to speak to Aleix or Maverick because it sounds like there weren't really any new parts for them. However, as Keith alluded to there was a new guy on the Aprilia, Miguel Oliveira, who, I mean, that's a fantastic debut. I saw Razlan in the airport just before I flew out, just for a quick chat before he went to his plane. And yeah, the team are really, really happy with how Miguel jumped on that bike. Remember, the Yamahas literally wheeled out Sunday night. The Aprilias come in. Razlan was saying, even things like the fuel filler doesn't fit the same. The bike stand, everything is different, totally different on these bikes. And Miguel goes out there and is quick. I mean, they say you shouldn't judge too much, but we've seen in the past when guys are quick from their first time on a bike, it is a good sign.
I tell you what, there's nothing quite like a default setup that works for a rider, that's for sure. And as a rider, that is just heaven sent. When you ride, you kick your leg over the bike, everything's in disarray. Nobody quite knows what's going on. I mean, I love this gentleman's agreement there is between the manufacturers. The fact that they're allowing their riders to jump on a bike that's next year while they're still contracted to the current team that they're in anyway is amazing, because there's all sorts of things. You don't want a rider to be too technically involved, because they can, bearing in mind they're still under contract with their current team, give information to that current team if they're picking up any sort of information from their new team and their new manufacturer. That can bleed back across. So this can you imagine it in Formula One being allowed to go? I don't think they do allow to go testing in a McLaren if you're a Mercedes driver before you're out of contract. There's all sorts of non-disclosure agreements that have to go out, NDAs flying around everywhere. So it's always pretty impressive how they do that. The situation regarding the upgrades is frightening for me. I mean, to be a fly on the wall back at the factory, I mean, I would think it's a pretty nerve-wracking place to be a factory technician, a factory engineer at the moment, with how close how do you find a couple of tenths of a second now, even out of a place like Valencia? You could pay or develop millions and millions of pounds worth of stuff. I can understand why Aprilia perhaps didn't have anything new for this test, because the lead in for engineering is too long. It's so long. It takes a long time to develop, something significantly different. And if you go down the wrong road, you are completely, kibosh for next year. If you've gone the wrong way at this time of the year, by the time the engineering, the train of engineering comes out in February, when we all go testing again later on next year, it could be a disaster. I bang on about it all the time. Why do we have this cutoff at the first round next year? Why are the manufacturers not campaigning to get a little bit more leeway regarding what they can bring to a track? Okay, I can understand why they don't want more test time, because that's very, very costly. You can travel around the world to somewhere where you expect it to be warm, and you can have a monsoon in Sepang or wherever, or Thailand or wherever you might go, expecting a dry track and it to be of a reasonable temperature. So I can understand why they might not want to add to that budget. We're going to be 21 Grand Prix next year. People are going to be frazzled by the end of the year anyway. So if you add a load more test days, like there used to be in the old days, where you go off tyre testing or whatever it was, teams are going to be worn out. Personnel are going to be leaving. There's going to be all sorts of trouble if that happens. But just allow them to test new bits during a race weekend, for a few weekends of the early part of the season. If we've got 21 rounds coming on, make the cut off, 3 rounds in or something, and get those tests done. And from a fan's perspective, it will give us something more at the beginning of the year. It will give, publications, television, everybody, that little extra bit at the beginning of the year, that little extra boost at the beginning of the year, to see who's going to turn it around after testing perhaps on a motorbike that doesn't work perfectly on the Tuesday of the preceding year.
Is it just the Sepang test left for them before racing starts?
There will be one at Portimao.
And so how many more days do they actually have before racing starts?
I think it's only 5 days.
Yeah.
I think Sepang is 3 and Portimao is only 2.
Yeah, but one of those days at Sepang is a shakedown test, isn't it? It's not the factory boys.
There's a shakedown test as well
as
those. Yeah.
So, I suppose throughout motorsport, testing time is becoming less and less, keeping costs down and things like that over the last few years. But you're right, next year is going to be action-packed, or not action-packed, just jam-packed, because you've got sprints as well to think about, these sprint races that are coming in, plus try to fit in Moto2 and Moto3. I know they've scrapped Moto3 warm-up, haven't they, to make room for just more space on the timetable. So the work really has well begun for these riders from this for only one Tuesday test. There's just no time. How much can they actually do over the winter now to prepare for their on-track test?
You've just wanged the nail on the head there, Harry. You're going to have 2 different motorbikes. You're going to have a bloody a Saturday sprint race bike. Eventually, what will happen is you're going to have a bike that 2 different setups that are going to work over a short period, where they can afford to use up tires more. The way that they use up a motorcycle or a car, whatever it is, you're going to have a sprint car, a sprint bike, and then a long race bike, where perhaps tire wear wise you can't afford to have it adjusted in the manner that you're having it adjusted at for the sprint race. And slowly but surely that will evolve over the course of the year. Sprint race bike will be exactly the same as a normal race bike come Saturday, Sunday, the first couple of rounds, but you can be absolutely sure these guys will develop a strategy for each race. And that means a suspension strategy, a power delivery strategy. Everything will be slightly different between the sprint race and the real race. So it's a lot of work these guys have got to do next year. Massive amount.
Well, it was Luca Marini who ended up fastest in the final test on the Muni VR46 Ducati, 1 minute 30 ahead of Vinales, Bezzecchi, as we say, Oliveira up there in fourth, ahead of Aleix Espargaro. So Aprilia looking good. Come just a little look forward to next year as well with Pecco and Ducati. But we also and we're also seeing, struggles for Yamaha already in testing. Marc Marquez not happy in Honda. I'm fearful. Should we be fearful of a bit of a Pecco Ducati walkover?
No, I think fearful is the wrong word. I think we're going to be excited. I don't think Pecco's going to walk over it next year. I think we're going to have a similar situation to this year where, he starts off the season as the world champion. That's pressure straight away. To win a world championship, in my view, is easier than retaining it. Retaining world championships, world titles. I've always said it's a 3-year rule. The first year is you're running on adrenaline, everything. You work towards that world title. You might win the world title. Second year, retaining it is quite hard work. It's the third year. If you're still there in the third year, then you've got that kind of quality to be a multiple world champion. It's not easy. There's no doubt about it. He needs one slip off, twist of the wrist, bang of the knee early on in testing, whatever it might be. There are so many elements that can ruin a rider's year. Yeah, he had momentum in the second half of the year, but it's a whole new ball game next year. And I think that I don't know what Ducati can do any more than they've already done. I mean, what can GG dream up for that bike next year? And there's going to be some changes that have come in as well, technical wise, that is going to alter the way that the bikes are gonna launch and the way they're going to be next year. It's going to be very interesting. I don't think it's over with Yamaha yet. I think that you've touched on it already over testing, that Honda and Yamaha had something previously, but it's not there at the Valencia test. It hasn't just disappeared up in smoke somewhere. Something somewhere when they download the data after Valencia, they'll find where that performance went. Honda make a fast motorbike. We'll see what the situation is. Valencia, is it representative of the rest of the year? Probably not. I mean, I think that if they're talking straight line speed, Valencia's got a long straight, so they will have been able to evaluate. That if it wasn't performing as good in a straight line as it had been previously, then where did it bloody go? They'll be looking at that now.
One manufacturer that did have a load of new parts, we should say, is KTM. This year, we saw the bike didn't change a great deal. Well, Brad Binder, who obviously could speak to us, staying with the team, we couldn't speak to Jack, but Brad Binder was saying, he had a ton of things to test. He had a new chassis during the race weekend, and he had another one at the test that seemed to sort of be in the opposite direction. So they've got to sort of find the bits. He liked the chassis in the race weekend, obviously, as Keith says. He came within 0.3 of winning the race. Unfortunately for Binder, it's the first year in MotoGP he hasn't won a race, but he's got pretty close, hasn't he, a couple of times. So yeah, you'll have to carry that motivation into next year now. But yeah, he was really pleased with all the work that's gone on with KTM. As you say, they've had this year where they've sort of been working on setup and tweaking and understanding what they need, and it seems like basically bits of everything, a new engine, everything, a whole package. He said it was the tricky bit was when he was being asked about the bike, was trying to sort of separate each bit up, because as he said, he tried it all as a package, as sort of a whole new bike. As he says, the trouble with Valencia is lap times are always really, really close there. You can probably double the gaps for a normal track. So it does give this sort of false sense of how close everybody is a little bit. It is a bit of a strange one, but they were lucky, as Keith says, also great weather, because if it had been, quite often you get rain at Valencia, and things like that, and that would have ruined the day. But yeah, there was a lot of things on track, a lot of things going on. Marini, we should say, he's staying with the same bike, so he's still on the 22 bike. That's what he's racing with next year. He's hoping to do a Bastianini, basically. I spoke to him at the end of the test, and he said, well, look, Bastianini got some upgrades this year, so even though he was on a year-old bike, Ducati supported him because he was winning races and doing well. So he said, that's what I need to do. And then he sort of paused and smiled and said, so I just need to beat the factory team on a year-old bike and then they'll give me new parts. So that's all I've got to do.
Easy. Simple as that. Nice from Luca. I tell you what, though, we've had a lot of questions and comments over the last couple of weeks that have been building up. And we've spoken about it a little bit, but now we actually are at the end of the season about Frankie Morbidelli. And I've seen that he's sort of backing up what Fabio's saying about these engine fears at Yamaha. But obviously, he's had a poor season. There's no denying that compared to his teammate. But Fabio seems like something a bit special on that Yamaha too. But Keith, I mean, next year, is this Morbidelli's last year if he carries on the way he is?
100%. There's no doubt about that he'll be looking for a new job at the end of the year if he has another year like he's had here. Will he capitulate halfway through the year if he has a year like he's had this year? We'll wait and see. It's a long time coming, testing for next year and the like, but he has been disappointing, hasn't he? I mean, I don't think that, even he wouldn't argue against that. I would think he's in turmoil to try and make it work. Okay, he might have had a bit of an opportunity to blame the bike a bit, but it's even worse when you've got, like you've already said, Quartararo, who's done so well, and makes the Yamaha work. They got work to do at the factory Yamaha team. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how they get around it during next year. But I mean, they're not starting from a strong position. Quartararo is their asset. There's no doubting it. But they've got to give him, the fact that he actually already has said that he's unhappy. The fact that's out there after the first test is slightly scary, to be honest with you. I mean, that for me, you mentioned earlier on about Marc Marquez, he wouldn't he wouldn't tell everyone that he's got a rocket ship of a motorbike because that keeps the engineers on their toes. Well, the fact that Quartararo has already said that Yamaha he hasn't got what he wants, I think that's a massive smack in the teeth for the engineers back in the factory. And they've got to get over it. They really have genuinely got to get over that.
Work to do then, it seems, over the winter. Let's go back to a bit of Moto3 and Moto2, shall we, from Valencia. And if we start with Moto3, Keith, in the pub at 8 a.m. With the pint going for Izan Guevara, leading the way. Slipstreamed away from Ontrue and won it.
Yeah, and it was typical atmosphere sapping Valencian race, wasn't it? Unfortunately, the Moto3 race was exactly what I would normally criticise Valencia for. It just took all the excitement out of it. How can you make a Moto3 race boring? Well, there we are, Valencia. Which was a great shame, really, because I was really looking forward to it. But even the commentators, I've got to say, sounded as flat as a pancake.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they had a night out the night before, but I mean, honestly, it was even the commentary was pretty poor. But they didn't have that much to shout about. But all the same, I mean, I think for us, here in the UK, I mean, the Scotsman, his last race in Moto3, I think it was quite emotional from that point of view. McPhee, he had an okay ride, but not great. He leaves the sport, and moves to World Supersport is the big rumor. But 28 years old, you're a long time retired in this game, and to be honest with you, he will have made a few quid because he's consistently been there or thereabouts in Grand Prix, and he's won Grand Prix, so he will have had bonus money and the like. But he's now moving into an arena where you don't make any money. Supersport, there is no money in Supersport. Quite a lot of people have to pay to be there. Now, I don't know whether John has done that at all. I'll have to have a word with Michael Laverty because he manages him at the end of the day. But it's not a money-making exercise where he's going. Now, he could turn up in World Supersport as a 28-year-old and win it. He could do something brilliant in it, and there may be a way back into Moto2 at a later date. We know he's a Grand Prix winner. What's that? 4 times. At the end of the day, you don't get them in a crisp packet. It's something you have to work bloody hard for. And John has been a Grand Prix winner. So him leaving the paddock will be hard for him. It's hard for the fans. Is there a way back for him? It's going to be tough. Mattia Passini is one of my favourites for making those comebacks every now and again and being somewhere a front runner. You got people like him that have been, right up the front, podium men, out of work. It is not an easy place to be, and it is also your livelihood. And John, not only is he leaving the Grand Prix paddock, but he's leaving a pay packet behind, I would imagine, as well, of any substantial note. And he's got an uphill struggle now moving on. Jake Dixon is still doing the business in Moto2. He's in a good position. I looked at the list. I mean, mate, it is competitive in Moto3 and Moto2 now, and where that talent is coming from, and they're all pushing, to get onto the grid. tough times for a lot of people.
It's a shame for John as well, because he 1 point has just put him out of the top 10. So he ended up 11th in the standings in the end, which, I mean, small things. But, you know, for a final, you want to be in the top 10, I suppose. But, well, Guevara ending up as the champion, obviously ahead of Sergio Garcia, Dennis Foggia, Ayumu Suzaki, and Dennis Onshu at the top 5 from the Moto 3 World Championship. But I suppose it was Moto 2 really that we need to shout about, isn't it, Pete? Because Pedro Acosta, the man, actually, what we all said and thought at the start of this year, the way he went about Moto 3, well, is he going to come into Moto 2 and absolutely dominate and win? Didn't quite happen, but he did end strong, led a controlled race once he took over for the Valencia victory in Moto 2, but really the day had to belong to the new champion and soon to be a MotoGP rider, Augusto Fernandez, second over the line after Ayagura's early exit. Another painful race for Agura, but Fernandez, those gold overalls certainly suited him.
Yes, they had those ready, didn't they? I mean, I mean, at one point that it was a 9.5 point lead, and at one point it was down to almost nothing, wasn't it, in those early laps with Aguri? I mean, he went on the attack, he did everything he had to do, but I mean, he was
So
still paying the price for the Sepang mistake, wasn't it? I mean, without that, he would have been in a much stronger position, obviously. And yeah, but he did what he needed to do, which is attack and try and bridge that gap. But yeah, just pushed too hard, and down he went, and that was it, over. So yeah, I mean, he'll certainly. It's going to take a long time, I think, to get over that last lap at Sepang for Agura, isn't it? And wondering what might have been, because that was the real turning point, wasn't it? But as you say, Fernandez, you know, the pressure was off then, wasn't it? And he then sort of upped his pace and sort of followed his teammate Acosta. Couldn't quite beat him, as you say. It does make you wonder, Acosta, without that mid-season leg-breaking injury, I mean, possibly he could have still been in there at the end. Rookie of the year.
Still top
bit of
5, yeah.
With those early laps with Lopez, wasn't there? I think Lopez had a slim chance, another rookie race winner this year, of stealing the rookie prize. I think, it got a bit close in some of those corners, didn't it, between the two of them? So, yeah, plenty of fireworks at the final round, but and sets us up for a great season next year with guys like Acosta and Lopez with a year under their belts. They're going to be tough to beat.
Don't forget as well, we lose one Scotsman, but we get a new one. Rory Skinner's in. So Rory Skinner for the American racing team next year. So John McPhee out of Grand Prix racing. And a guy that I have to mention, because like, love him or hate him, Romano Fenati. He's in Moto 3 next year. So there's a couple of little points here and there that are going to make things interesting. But Rory Skinner, now there's a kid that wasn't given the chance when we thought he should have been given it after he won the Talent Cup series. Dorna, for some reason, I gave it to the third place guy. I never quite worked that one out. It was kind of a backhanded thing for them, and Skinner never got his way through. But I wonder whether that year that he spent back here in Britain, you know, absolutely smashing the pants off everybody in Supersport and the like, and then he came into Superbike last year, whether that slight delay in his progression has done him good, has given him the extra weapons he needs to come into Moto 2 next year full time. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how he gets on with that. I think the kid's going to go well. I really do. I think the Triumph's going to suit him, and I think he's going to get on really good. So we lose one Scotsman, but we get another one.
I think it's worth also saying, sorry, Pete, you just brought up Alonso Lopez before that as well, didn't you? I think the first 6 rounds he missed as well, and actually to still finish top 8, second rookie, watch out for him as well next year, as you say. He's going to be on it. So Moto 2 is looking good next year.
Well, we better get some predictions
in. That ties in with what Keith was saying about Fenati as well, because Lopez came in at Fenati's expense. So Fenati was sort of parked by Speed Up, which caused a bit of controversy at the time, but you can't argue with Luca Boscoscuro's for the talent picking side. Fabio Quartararo came through that team as well. And just on the other side of adding to the people who have had a miserable end of the year, what about Vietti? You know, leading the World Championship. I mean, he crashed out again on Sunday. He's got a double long lap penalty for the start of next year's season. So if he thought things couldn't get any worse and that he's put it behind him, he got black flagged, and there was an issue with the marshals, I think disobeying the marshals. So yeah, he's going into the winter knowing that he's got a double long lap for Portimao next year.
Kind of a Christmas present.
What an it. Yeah, maybe he'll hope race control might forget by the time it by the time it comes to next year. I highly doubt it. We also say, I mean, we're still, I think I'm not sure if we've got a fully confirmed grid for next year yet, have we, for Moto2 and Moto3? But we're losing a couple of sort of well-known names. Cameron Bobier, obviously the American, he's off to pastures new. Well, we're going back to America, Moto America, so we wish him all the best, wanting to spend more time at home and less time sort of traveling back and forth. So wishing him all the best. But at the end of the day, it was Augusto Fernandez, who is the new Moto2 champion. He moves up to MotoGP, of course. Aigura second, Aaron Canet in third, Tony Arbolino and Pedro Acosta, the top five and the highest rookie, just in front of Jake Dixon. And do you think this was a bit of a breakthrough year, Keith, for Jake?
It's what we expected him to be, a podium man at the end of the day, or there or thereabouts. You know, like Jake is a contender. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Looking at the way that the things go next year, I mean, we've got a few guys that are coming up. Sergio Garcia obviously moves up to Moto2 from Moto3, so that's going to be an interesting one. Darren Binder.
Oh, yes, of course.
Comes into Moto2. He jumped Moto2 from Moto3 straight to MotoGP. So Darren Binder comes back into Moto2. That, I think, with what he's learned in MotoGP will translate really well into Moto2. So I'm looking forward to seeing Darren Binder. I don't think he's been given a fair crack of the whip, to be honest. I don't think Darren Binder had a bad season in MotoGP, but he's been dropped and he moves into Moto2. Marcos Ramirez goes from he's trying his luck by going from 42 to 24 as a number. so
if in doubt,
switch numbers. So that's quite interesting. Boya Gomez is out there. Lucas Tulovic is in there. Koda Nazani is going to be there as well. Pedro Acosta, actually, he's going to be 37, obviously, next year, sorry. He's another number changer. He's going to be from 51 to 37. And Dennis Foggia, you mentioned him a moment ago, comes up into Moto2 from Moto3. So there are quite a lot of subtle changes here and there. The grids are out. I can't see them changing substantially at all at the moment. So you asked a question about the grids. I've got them in front of me. I made a load of notes while I was down the pub, so I've got to check them now.
Have you got glass marks on them as well?
Everything. I've got insults on them. I can't even put them to the screen because everybody's written in and wrote bloody all sorts of things. I'll give you a kind of gentle one. Stop being a wanker, Keith. Thank you very much. That's Bertie Simmons, I think. Happy birthday to Aid. There you go. I don't know who the hell. I don't know what. I mean, I must have been sat with a bloke called Aid, but it's happy birthday to Aid. So there you go. Retrospective birthday wishes to you. But
while we're doing shout outs, I should say I saw Graham Holt, photographer. He listens to the podcast at Valencia, so he came over. He was agreeing with a lot of Keith's opinions. So apart from that, he seemed like a very nice guy.
Yeah. Doesn't sound right, yeah.
But he was saying they're trying to get some more sort of people from more diverse backgrounds into motorsport media. That's what he was, he's hoping to get sort of a bit more awareness for that, get photographers, media into different teams and things. So he's looking for more backing for that. So I think Click Diversity is his website. So anyone that can help him with that, go and take a look. He's got some students I think he's had placed in teams and things, and looking to do more on that next year. So,
I think MotoGP. I think that Dorna do a fantastic job, but get criticised in certain other areas. And I think opening up a little bit more in the paddock. I mean, they've gone the other way a bit this year, using the pandemic as a bit of an excuse for clamping down on more things. And I think they could do with. I hate to say this, but how Liberty have treated Formula One after they kicked Bernie out of the driver's chair, has worked really well for Formula One. They've found that angle where it ramped up for young people to come and you mentioned diversification. Of course, it's a big thing nowadays in the paddock. I never thought it wasn't that diverse, but clearly I'm in a minority. There are areas that can be improved hugely, and I think Dorna definitely need to work on that area. Access to people through social media, through digital content and the like, needs to be ramped up in our MotoGP package. Clamping down on web journalism. I mean, this is one close to your heart here, Pete, because web journalism is considered to be like the third-rate medium, which is just nuts because we know it's not. I mean, not in the way that youngsters access information nowadays. And I think that's where Dorna are looking at it in a kind of aged way. Maybe somebody from Saga is running their digital medium. Who the hell knows? But it definitely needs a change, a massive change, really. Actually, it's not massive. It's a subtle change that's easy to implement, is to give better access to social media and digital platforms. And that is the future. Give another 5 years maximum, I would say. Most people will be watching this stuff, not on TV. It'll all be on handheld. It'll be, you'll be able to access it in a completely different way to the way that we are. Television is old hat. That's gone out the window. It's only us old farts who go and watch it down the pub that kind of watch it on TV nowadays. Things have changed massively. And I think MotoGP are a bit behind the game. They need to just catch up on that a little bit. They need to get further ahead on what particularly web platforms, your mate that you're talking about just there. They need better access. They need to be respected in the way that they should be respected in what they put out there, because that is what a huge proportion of motorcycle fans are watching or accessing the sport with.
Absolutely. Well, check out that info as well that Pete mentioned just a few moments ago. But it's something that I think a lot of people would be agreeing with you there with Keith. Now, I think we're getting towards the end of this show, but predictions are no more for the time being. But I can reveal out of our own little trio who has won.
Drum roll.
Drum roll, please. It was only 1 point scored from Valencia, with Keith getting a point for Rins on the podium. Pete and myself, nada. Nil point, absolutely nothing. So, unfortunately for myself and Pete, okay, we're in a predicament here. So, I think we might have to have a tiebreaker. I'm last, so I've got 7, but it's a respectable last. 17 points. But Keith and Pete, you're tied on 19. So I don't know if we need some sort of tiebreaker or I don't know. What do you think?
Who's got the biggest nose?
I
win.
Who's got the most hair? All right.
Wow. No, I think Keith should. I will hand my title over. I think Keith is winning, getting the final round. I think that.
I'll tell you what. I'm quite happy to have us cross the line together, mate. It's all a bit of a laugh anyway, isn't it? And to be honest, if we only got 19 points, we deserve a slap. I don't know about an accolade. So I'm not taking any credit for 19 points over an entire year. So at the end of the day, I'm sure there are people at home that have done a bloody sight better than we did. So maybe we need to buy someone a pint somewhere else rather than blow smoke up our own kill.
We should book out that pub and do a MotoGP meetup. There we go.
I didn't tell you who is the landlord of this particular pub. Is Chris Herring, who used to be PR for Honda, Petronas, Circuit of Wales. We don't talk about that much. And management at Fogarty's and so on and so forth. So Chris Herring is the landlord of the pub. So you can understand why it's got a fair MotoGP angle to it. But Stirrup Cup, Barton Seagrave, Kettering. There you go. Big plug. You'll have a great welcome.
Yeah.
And it's one of them pubs where there's books on the shelves, like MotoGP books. You can sit in there and you can have a pint. You can read your books you've not seen and stuff like that. There's pictures on the wall. In fact, after I leave you today, I'm going to the Friday the 13th club lunch, which is every month. Sorry, there's a Friday the 13th club lunch, which is full of.
But it's the 11th.
It's all the old hack journalists. I don't know what I'm doing there because I'm not a journalist, but basically there'll be everybody there today. Steve Parrish, Neil McKenzie, because we've all moved into the journalistic role, if you like, to a certain extent. So I'm going to have to drag Pete along at some stage. And all it's about is how you can rip a new one in anybody that's next door to you. It's just like everybody getting stuck in everyone else. And that's being held later on this afternoon.
Oh, delightful. Well, look, I think that just about does it. Here's what's happening for us, though, for the rest of the off-season. Sadly, this is probably our last show for November, but we'll be back for a Christmas show in December, one in January, and then back up to 4 shows a week from February onwards. So actually, it's not too long to wait. So, let us know questions, any topics you want us to cover, and things like that, off-season chat that you'd like to get involved with, and we'll see what we can come up with in the meantime. But I think I'd say for both myself, Pete and Keith, thank you so much for your company over the whole year. We can't literally do this without you guys listening, watching, wherever you listen and watch to us, whether you're subscribed to the Crash MotoGP YouTube channel, where you can watch the whole show in vision, or you're listening to us through Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever. We really do love having your company, and it's a pleasure to share MotoGP with you throughout the year. So my thanks to you all for listening, and my thanks, of course, to Keith Huewen and Pete McLaren. Literally could not do it without them either. So thank you both. Enjoy a little bit of time off. Enjoy the off season, everybody. Get your questions in. Leave them in the comments section. Tweet, Instagram, Facebook us. Just search Crash MotoGP. All the usual ways. Leave us a review. Christmas review, perhaps. We'd love to hear them wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you in December for a Christmas special. But from the Holiday Inn in Toulon, bye-bye.